July 27th. All right.
I didn't even know that.
Well, hi, everyone. Today is Sunday, July 27th here in North America. My name is Jennifer Madrill in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm here with my two buddies.
Dave Cormier in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island.
Jeff Lebo, Busan, Korea. John is not here, but we
He's
are.
not here.
And
He would be
we're
my
talking-
third buddy if he were here, but he's not
Yes.
here.
And we have a topic. What
We
is
actually
it?
have a
You have a topic. I think that one of the questions that's been spinning around in my head the last couple of weeks is around the ethics of innovation in education. And I think with the recent massive teaching issue that happened with Coursera, and a teacher there who had a research question he says that he was on about during the course and didn't tell his students about it, but sort of invited them all in and then absconded from the course as an experiment to see what would happen. That brings me to sort of a broader question around how we should think about ethics and innovation. If we look back over the last 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years of research, there's a reason why we have research ethics, why we have a formal process before we do research. If you look at the Milgram experiments from the 60s, where, are you guys familiar with the Milgram experiments?
Well, go ahead.
They're fascinating. What this researcher did is he ostensibly put these people on electrodes behind a glass wall. They weren't real electrodes, but they were actors. They were going to act as if anytime the electrodes went off, those people were going to scream and shout as if they're in terrible pain. The people on the other side of the window were actually the people being experimented upon. So what they did is they invited those people to come in, and they said, these people need to learn something, these people need to do whatever. You turn that knob, and the more you turn that knob, the more electricity is going to push through them, and the more they're going to get this electric jolt. So those people came in, and what they found was that a large majority of the people who came in were more than willing, based on a vague explanation, to electrocute people. And when they did that experiment, the argument that they made was, well, nobody's going to get hurt. Well, actually, a lot of those people ended up becoming very gravely psychologically hurt by those experiments and left very different kinds of people because they did things that they were very, very, very ashamed of. And they always end up being the marker for how we look at why we need to be ethically good researchers. When we look at what we do at a Tech Talk, or what we've done for the last 10 years really, we do all kinds of innovation, experimenty stuff. And we're not part of any formal structure that forces us to follow any ethical guidelines. We just kind of do the stuff we want to do. And certainly open teaching brings us to those kinds of places and communities like this one. And the question becomes, where is our ethical responsibility related to these people who aren't paying to come, who in many cases we don't even know? Where does the ethics, where does it lie? Where do our responsibilities lie? And what kinds of things should we not do, even though they'd be fun and interesting to try anyway?
Yeah. One word always jumps out at me in this type of conversation. It's the word transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And so if folks are aware of what you're doing, you have a lot more leeway to do fun, crazy, interesting things. And I think, I kind of followed along a little bit with the story you mentioned, the MOOC that kind of went awry. And I think that was the big problem. Even his people who were paying him to do this, the people at Coursera were like, what the heck are you doing? And so that's kind of the whole purpose of an IRB. It's transparency. It's like, this is what I intend to do. This is why I want to do it. This is how I'm telling people what I'm doing. And it just seems to be kind of the more you tell people what you're trying to do, the more solid ground you are in an ethical perspective, in my mind. And I think, I don't even know to this day, has he really come clean after the fact, saying what he was trying to accomplish?
Hey, can we hear a little bit more about the Coursera situation? What happened after the guy bailed?
Well, Paul-Olivier Dehaye just joined our RISO 14 group, this guy who taught this course, and just asked the question there yesterday. So he's still obviously out there. And the first thing he said when he joined was that he is under a ban from talking about it from his institution.
Which I don't really understand. That's like very odd. It's very odd.
It seems very odd.
Yeah.
So he has a non-disclosure agreement around the issue. The issue, he started a MOOC on Coursera, and he ran about 2 or 3 weeks, and then he disappeared. And his idea that so he claims, I mean, we have no idea if this is his idea before the fact or whether or not he just came up with this after the fact to explain the fact they didn't want to do it anymore or whatever, because we have no way of knowing one way or the other. He just said that it was an experiment in seeing whether or not people could socially organize themselves to be able to learn without his presence. My first response is, wow, I have a lot of research for you. You could have just read, because it's not like you made that up. So he became a very controversial figure. And then you start asking questions like, is it ethical for him to do that? Should we encourage people not to do that? I mean, you look at you, Jeff. I mean, you've been running online communities for 15 years. I think you're an extraordinarily ethical fellow. But if somebody was coming up to you for advice, how would you advise them on maintaining an ethical stance whenever they're innovating online with education? Ooh, that paused him.
Yeah.
Could be early in the morning.
I feel like I need a little more coffee before I realize. I mean, something honestly I haven't thought about in the context of providing free, open.
But that has come up on Ed Tech Talk for sure. Like, I'm just trying to think back in the days when, what was it, Illuminate or one of those folks were trying to give us something free to try out and use. Does that mean then we're endorsing them? Or what are how do you make decisions on tools you're going to use or people you're going to associate yourself with? Is there money exchanging hands under the table that maybe people aren't aware of? Those types of things. They creep in, right?
All right,
those are a lot of times money, right? A lot of times money.
Standards and
forcing people into Google and all the information you're giving away to Google by forcing them to work there. Like, there's so many of these questions that are the daily bread of the work that we do. We don't talk about them much. Frankly, the Google thing's kind of embarrassing. I don't like to talk about it too much.
Right. Yeah.
For sure. Some ethical challenges there too.
Well, we had a discussion in our service learning group where we have the students prepare everything they do has to be Creative Commons license, and we post everything openly. Yet, when I go talk about it, I'm doing it in closed forums. I'm publishing it to walled gardens. And is that ethical? I've got, I think 5 different proposals were accepted in the past 6 months or so about the service learning project that will not see the light of day unless you subscribe to some journal or you attend the conference. And so is that ethical? Because everything has been, up to this point, the client has agreed to have Creative Commons licensing, that all the artifacts would be freely available. So those types of things creep in as well. Like, how are you going to report on what you're doing in this day and age of open access? In fact, I think Bonnie and I had a mini back channel on that with the work she's doing. I think maybe Dave, you know more about it than I could tell from the 140 characters, but she's like publishing a paper in a closed access journal about open source or open access something or another. So
yeah, it's the first paper of her 3-paper thesis.
Yeah.
So are you there yet, Jeff? Are you ready to tell us what we should do?
I don't think there's any universal ethics. I think we can think of categories of. I do think transparency is core, that you have to be clear about what you're doing, but privacy, there have to be a certain number of categories, commercial, how you're going to monetize things, and then every endeavor gets to come up with their own code. And if you're open and transparent about it, people can choose to play with you or not.
Let me translate this into a direct question for you, Jeff.
Okay.
How can you inform one of your 25 students that you're teaching what decision they're making by blogging openly in your class? This is one that troubles me. So you can say your work is going to be blogged in the open, and the people in front of you have no idea what that means. So you can get their permission, but I mean, there's no way to get informed consent on something that someone doesn't understand yet. So how do you think about that specific position from an ethical standpoint?
Well, I say I want you to post publicly, but you don't have to identify yourself. So if you don't want your identity to be known, create a pseudonym or an alias. But I say, okay, in the first week, I kind of have okay, this is what this course is. This is what I'm asking you to do. If this doesn't sound like something you want to do, I suggest another course. Now, this is not, they have the option of not having to take my course, well, in most situations. Um, so again, transparency.
What about you, Jen?
Yeah, it comes up a lot where it was almost easier in 2006 to say go blog openly because we kind of didn't know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've kind of seen, maybe someone has had a messy divorce and they don't really want their past, family relations to follow along with what they're doing in their new life. And those types of things that, oh, yeah, you're right. I get it. And so it's like Jeff was saying, then you make kind of adjustments to what your original intent was and said, okay, well then it's okay to use a pseudonym. And then it's like, whoa, then it's not really exactly my original intent where you're trying to help people build an online persona. And there's kind of those underlying things you try to do beyond just having an open place for people to post. You're kind of trying to help bring them into this new world. So then you start backpedaling on things that you originally thought were really important, that you have to get out there with who you are and what's important to you and share yourself. And then, well, okay, I get it. You might not want to for other reasons that I hadn't contemplated. But then I do think that takes away from our original idea. With this, again, we've talked about it a couple times here. We had a requirement or actually going forward, we're going to have a requirement that the students have to post reflections about what they're doing on their service learning projects. And so the group I was working with had a discussion, should those be one-to-one with the facilitator or should they be open? And I was kind of the lone voice out of three, was one-third of the voices was saying it has to be open. The other two were saying no, kind of for the reasons we were talking about, saying we don't know the reasons people might not want to be open about it. And so we shouldn't presume that everyone is like us and wants to be open, and we should start out saying, the main reason, or the main conversation has to happen between the learner and the facilitator, and if the student chooses to make it open, that's up to them to do, which I appreciate, the sentiment of kind of what Jeff was saying. You can use a pseudonym or whatever you want to do, but it gets away from that whole kind of the reason we all kind of got into this, that it's the openness and the transparency and the sharing and the reciprocity and all those fun things that come with being open. So I don't know. I really don't know the answer. I guess I'm now these days tending to fall on the side of what Jeff said. If someone says, I don't want to be open, I don't push the issue.
But the question of what Paul Olivier DeHaye did, he wasn't transparent. He was doing research, some money was involved. So that's, I kind of get what he was trying to do.
I kind of don't. I think it's self-serving. I think it's completely self-serving.
Yeah,
you wanted to see how cool, some cool thing you could try, and it was icky. I think it was icky to me. See, the more the light shines on it, it comes. I can't really see the silver lining on it, but maybe you guys can. Can you guys see a silver lining to what he tried to do? If we understand what he's trying to do.
Well, Dave has been remarkably quiet here, just asking questions. So, Dave, what are the answers? What are the ethics of innovation?
What are you talking about? I think I'm just trying to understand your guys' position. That's my way. That's how I am about things.
That's right.
I think, obviously it's a complex question, and obviously there's going to be different solutions and all these different. I think transparency is critical. The one that I struggle with, maybe even because the openness one, I think we've all been around it enough times. We come up with little kind of bridging structures that work out, and I tell my students.
But don't you almost think it's sad though, Dave? Like the openness is almost sad right now. You kind of have to fight for the open, There's all these.
Do.
But anyway.
And it just. But where I really get stuck is when I have this crazy new idea, and I have them occasionally. I don't know that they're new, but they're often crazy. And I think, I have a social contract with these students. I have responsibilities to these students. I can tell them what I'm going to do, but they're not really going to understand it or believe it, frankly. So at what point is it my responsibility as an educator to trust my instincts, do my best to be transparent, and just go ahead and try these things? And how much of my responsibility is to actually follow the existing research that talks about education, or at least be able to like harken back to a strand. And I've done this on occasion where I'll find obscure bits of research from the 70s and go, we're going to do that. But when you take it upon yourself to take 25 paying people and say, we're going to do this crazy thing you've never heard of before, and I hope it's going to work. To some degree, it depends on you doing stuff for it to work. So if all of your classmates are no good, then this is really not going to be any good for you. Like, I find those to be challenging kinds of questions. I mean, hey, I think what you've got there is an inexperienced innovator who had an idea that he thought was really cool and never really thought his way through it. Mm-hmm. That's my feeling about it. I think that you'll often see that from people who have no experience working with community, who don't sort of automatically think of those other people as humans. And to me, it looks like inexperience and hubris.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
But if you're going to try something totally new, just to finish up that thought, you're going to try something totally new, how much of your where does your responsibility lie between you and the students that you're working with?
I think, you know what, I think the experience generally works, if you truly are trying something new and you really don't know how it's going to work, I think in many levels it works a lot better if you say, I don't know how this is going to work, and this is what I'm trying to do, and if it fails, thanks for coming along for the ride, we won't do it this way again. You know, I've kind of got a back channel going with Jason here about this whole idea of icky. And I just think the more you try to censor or it kind of gets to your whole thing of hubris. It becomes about you versus what you're having a shared experience. The more you try to not share what you're doing, it just gets a level of icky that it just does. I don't know why. Oh, there's Tom's feet. I'm just like that. But I don't know. That could just be me. But I just tend to like to tell people when I'm trying something new, and thank them for coming along for the ride, and saying this we're pioneering. We're trying something that's really never been done, and how cool is that? And
I mean, the false sense of security Jason's talking about is true to a certain extent. I feel different about it in the world we live in on open online courses and MOOCs and all that, as opposed to like a K-12 environment. And I think there needs to be a higher standard of transparency and privacy protection, perhaps, in those environments. But once you're on your own or you're an adult, you can make your decision to participate or not.
But don't you want to know the person's intentions of what you're doing? You're kind of, and I think that's what you get more skilled at as you spend more time online. You can kind of tell who's out there for whatever their reasons may be.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
so, but those that are more novice at that, like, aren't quite as skilled at being able to decipher.
But also, as a teacher,
intention.
I think there might be times when we don't want to say, "Hi, I'm going to try this, and I don't know if it's going to work," and like, there can be a case made for presenting something in I know what I'm doing, not pretending to have a competence you don't, but being a pack leader, having a calm, assertive, setting a certain tone that's not, gee, I don't know, it might work, it might not.
Well, yeah, you don't want to look like an idiot.
I don't think you need to quite do it that way. I certainly don't think I need to go, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I can do it with a slightly different voice. That little old lady voice may not be. Maybe that's been your problem all along, Jeff.
I wouldn't follow you along on that.
I wouldn't. No, I agree with you. No, I think you make a good point. Is that you can be transparent without being a moron. And I think that I am more than happy to tell students that I'm not entirely sure how a course is going to go, but I don't think they look at me and think, oh, that guy has no idea what he's talking about. At least they don't say that. They may be thinking it. I think that the tone that you approach that with is really important. But still, though, Jen, just to follow up on what you were saying, if you say, I don't know if it's going to work, if they've already paid you for a certain thing, I mean, people run into this problem all the time, right? They go, oh, those people have already taken this class with an understanding of what this class is, and now I'm taking it somewhere else. And unless your class description says, this is going to be a crazy class and I don't know how it's going to go,
Right.
they already kind of have an understanding of what's going to happen. So if they come to my class, as the course description says, to learn about CD-ROMs. Have you ever read the course description for my class? It's very funny.
No, it would be funny to read that.
Yeah, it talks about CD-ROMs.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, at a personal level, I wouldn't, on a class I was being paid at for example, Old Dominion where I teach, I wouldn't make it so wacky. I truly didn't know. I meant at a pretty discrete level, like, for example, we're going to go into an Adobe Connect breakout room and we're going to use a Google Doc to try to document this, and I'm hoping to bring you all back together. I may not know those, hour and 45 minutes how that's going to go, but I don't necessarily mean, this whole wacky, I'm not going to take you on a wild ride that I really have no idea where the whole ride's going to go, which it sounds a little bit like this guy was going. But also, there's still that whole itch with his thing that drives me nuts, is this whole self-serving thing. There was something going on there that he wanted to do something that he felt no one else had done, and he wanted to be the one to do it. And I could be totally wrong. Again, I'm watching it from the periphery, but is there a part of it in your mind that was a kind of a narcissistic, I'm going to go out there and try something that's never been done aspect to it? Me personally, as the facilitator.
I hate to make those kinds of assumptions about people I don't know. It's certainly been reported that way. Whether or not it wasn't in practice, it's tough to know. I just posted, for those of you wondering, I just posted in the Skype window the description of my course, which I think probably gives a false understanding. It talks about
Yeah, that's interesting.
CD-ROMs, World Wide Web resources.
Overhead projectors.
Yeah,
I'm
overhead
curious how those
projectors.
work.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
And overhead projectors. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think they're quite ready, given that course description, for the class that they run into when they hit the rhizome.
But I think, what, it also, what, Dave, you're talking about and you're right, I should in general, I don't know what the guy's deal was. I really don't know. But I think most educational experiences, I feel as an instructor, it's a shared ride. I'm on it with a student, we're there together, I'm going to do the best I can to make it an awesome experience. I feel that contract was broken in this case. And again, I hope I'm proven wrong. But it just seemed like it was not a shared ride, that there were two different objectives, and that's the part that screams icky to me. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope it turns out to be that's not the case. But I think as an instructor, that's kind of why we all get into this, to help the student along, and let's
I love
try
Jason's
things out.
comment in the chat room about the literacy of scumbag detection.
Yeah.
And I think in thinking about this question, it's important to think about how we educate learners about participating in these kinds of environments. And so scumbag detection, I think, is an important one, and an awareness of privacy and anonymity and all whatever else.
But
Well,
would you
Ryan
agree?
calls it crap
sorry.
detection, right?
Yeah. But would you agree, if you take your students on a wild ride, you're doing it in their best interest, and you may be wrong. I mean, you ultimately, what you're trying to do is incorrect, but you're not doing it for reasons other than to hopefully expand their experience and make it more meaningful for them, right?
That's
And so
always part of it. I do feel like sometimes there's a little bit of a self-indulgence. I do it because I want to try it.
Oh, so maybe that's like a weird line. Like, maybe that's when things can go south, right? If that envelope gets pushed a bit much.
That's a tough one for me, because you're pointing at me when you're saying that, because I get geeked out about trying these things, right? Like, I get all like, ooh, this is going to be fun, I wonder what's going to happen. I'm not exactly shy about talking about my work either, right? So I don't know,
Jen's a
maybe
better
I resemble that remark. Jen is clearly a better person. I think we'd all agree on that.
But don't you think, though, that might be the slippery slope? If you get too far down that path, and then suddenly the learner is like some foreign thing that, oh yeah, that's right, I'm supposed to be helping someone on their learning journey, then it's like, whoa, I better dial it back a little bit and make sure that
Well,
I know you do that, Dave. I watched you do it. Like when you kind of get the tears, people start crying in your class. You're like, whoop, dial it back a
too
bit.
far. Well, even Rise of 14 is a really good example of that too, right? That went south on me about 5 times. And I did do really annoying things to try to get people to participate, but I was pretty over the top about it.
How did Rise of 14 go south on you?
Oh, there were a couple of big battle debates between people, like factions that formed, and like people getting really angry at each other and stuff. And to some degree, that kind of oppositionalism happened because of the way I structured the course. Because I put the questions in really oppositional format, people came in on opposite sides of it. And there are some places where I managed to get involved early enough to avoid those conversations going too far, and in some cases I was in the wrong time zone, and by the time I got there were 97 comments and everybody was shouting at each other.
And did you think of that as going south or getting interesting?
Or just pushing buttons?
No, it got to the point where it was affecting. When you have an entire curriculum that's negotiated by the people who are doing it, if the curriculum becomes yes it is, no it isn't, yes it is, no it isn't, you're losing the course, right? What you want it to be about people expressing their positions, not just being oppositional. And that's where that course was constantly about me trying to redirect those things back to people going, well, okay, but tell us what your point is. That's great. It doesn't mean that anybody else's is wrong. And there was one time where I got mad at somebody and posted something on their blog I probably shouldn't have.
You got mad at somebody? I don't think I've ever seen you get mad at it. I mean, I've heard you get your panties in a bundle, but I've never heard you get mad at somebody.
I got a little frustrated with them because
really?
every 3 days they were posting a blog post that was just like nitpicky, and it was, I don't know, probably the 4,000th thing I read that day, and I went, that's enough.
Well, there you go.
And then the next morning I was like, I'm an idiot. Why did I even post that? I'm not saying what I posted was wrong. Just I'm the facilitator. I can't be taking those kinds of positions. It has a huge effect on the tone.
Well, you could go back hundreds of years and talk about the ethics of discipline in, a classroom.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
6th grade teachers have been yelling at 6th grade students for
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
Classroom management, exactly.
My grade teacher, he used to bang the kid's head against the wall like this. He was a very frustrating child, though. I mean, I do understand. Probably wasn't a good thing. Yeah, but I guess at the end of the day, as long as we keep asking ourselves these questions, we're doing okay. Once we forget that every time we force someone to use Google, we're selling their soul to the devil, then,
What are the main categories that a teacher should be considering if they approach this question? So Google involves privacy and personal data. What else?
Well, to me, the Google thing is totally about, just so the students realize, it's kind of like Jason, we're kind of going around in circles here, but the scumbag detection, I know Google is out for Google. So I know that. Do I know that my students know that when I ask them to use a Google Doc? No. So then it's kind of a transparency issue. Then you have a discussion saying, okay, we're going to be using Google, and so does everybody know that this is going to be searchable or whatever, however we decide to use a Google whatever tool we're using, then it gets into the transparency issue.
So transparency,
big.
Honesty without sounding like the little old lady Jeff described earlier.
Yeah, I don't like Jeff's old lady. That was scary.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good approach. So you've got the honesty, the transparency, and to some degree, I like to think of it as reflexive, informed consent. So I will inform them at the beginning, and then as they start to understand what I'm talking about, I will give them additional chances to consent. So that, by week 3 or 4, they're starting to understand what's going on, and they're like, oh, now that I think about this doesn't right for me. Great, that means you're understanding it. I have no problem with you having positions about openness or transparency, whatever. What I'm trying to do for you in this course is have you understand it. Because while you may not like it or agree with it, you're going to be a teacher in a classroom, and everybody else is living it, whether you acknowledge it or not.
And I know we're totally out of time to go down this path, but even when I introduce a new topic with students, I always frame it with the counterpoint. So if I say I believe in blah 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 as myself because this is what I've looked into, I will always frame it or do my best to frame it with the counterpoint. And I think that also gets into this whole thing with the scumbag detection, saying to folks, you know, whenever you're reading about something or at a conference and someone is saying whatever, do your best to find the counterpoints and make your own informed decision on if you're going to buy into what this person's selling. And it drives students nuts to do that because they're like, well, tell us what we're supposed to know. Well, I won't do that. I will say, here's a point and here's a counterpoint. I tend to fall on this side of the continuum. You may find these things to be more compelling, but that's up to you to figure out. And that to me is the job of the best you can do as a facilitator and instructor is to give an informed picture of what's out there as you know it and say, go make your best decision. But that's my soapbox.
I think that's a wonderful note to finish on right there. Bang.